Dr. Mondaca is going to start, I believe. Dr. Mondaca is a veterinarian from Mexico, worked for several years with the Solis Corporation in the Sonora region, and then came back and got his PhD at the University of Minnesota, and now is working in the Cannon Valley practice with Mike Strobel, and also doing various presentations and working with regional control efforts in Mexico.
Welcome, and thanks, Reed and Dale, for inviting me to this presentation. Peter and I will talk a little bit about how we have used some of the software available for basically mapping and spatial analysis in this project of regional control. Just briefly, all these kind of mapping and geoanalysis packages are called EIS, Geographical Information Systems. This is just basically hardware equipment, software packages, and perhaps the most important thing of everything, data with geo-related points. That is perhaps the most important thing. Any type of point that has an address or a set of coordinates in latitude and longitude is what I needed for this kind of systems. And of course, in the late, in these previous years, there has been a lot of advancements in the satellite imaging. In this case, there are a lot of free software in the internet, and most of we know about the Google Earth, but also there are some other sources of information from government agencies. This is in the case of the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. In the University of Minnesota, we have been using a software called AdView. With this program, we have applied some of the capabilities for mapping, statistical analysis, networking. With those capabilities, we can visualize not only the geographical location of the points in the area study and the relative position among them, but also we can see some other geographical features that can be forests, towns, rivers, and roads. All those elements are really important when we are trying to analyze the patterns of disease distribution in a given area. As Bob mentioned earlier, in late 2002, we started working with people from southern Minnesota in regional project of PRRS control. In this case, it was in the area of Rice County. And again, one of the most important points for this project was to know how many sites, how many peak sites there were in the area and where they located, and what the characteristics of those sites were. The first thing that we need to know was about the right location of those points, because we have seen in almost everywhere, Minnesota or Mexico, that the information that we have from the local association of pork producer or the government agencies is that information about the site location is wrong most of the cases. Sometimes if you're based on that information, you will find that a farm is in the middle of a lake or a forest or in the ocean or something. So the first thing that we started to do was using the GPS device that is also part of this big system of geographical information, and we started to take the measurement side by side, of course, taking care of the biosecurity measurements. And we got this kind of information. We can show where the site were located. Using some of the tools of this software, we also could visualize some of the characteristics of those sites, in this case in terms of production time and personalized status. And we can see how those characteristics of the site are changing over time. And also we can show some other characteristics, in this case the virus isolations in the area. We saw that there were kind of a geographical pattern of distribution of some strains in that area. Again, all those characteristics of the sites are dynamics, and we need to have all that information updated in order to have accurate maps, to have a better understanding of what is happening in the area. Peter?
Thanks, Enrique. I'll just step up for a second and interrupt Enrique's flow a little bit. I arrived at Minnesota 2003. Thanks, Enrique. And saw everyone already talking a lot about regional approaches needing to be taken, seeing Scott doing all this sort of wonderful work down at the animal and individual farm level, Bob, Enrique working on county level projects to get things going. And so I thought, you know, in my new position, where can I fit into this group working on this major problem? It was really, you know, where we can go at the next level. So if we're going to, in the long term, be dealing with regional control, how can we scale up and make, you know, modern tools? We've got a lot of development in GIS that Enrique was talking about, information technology. What can we do to try and move the ball forward a little bit in terms of making these tools available to the veterinary practitioners in the swine industry? So barriers, the technology part, one thing I'll say, that's not the issue really now. The second part is the sociology, and Bob's sort of broken ground there at the county level, getting people to share information. How do we move forward with people getting comfortable with that? So as we go to scale up, we can start off, you know, thinking at local level and looking at a few farms. We can scale up, as Enrique's shown you, and say, okay, county level projects. Bob showed a slide before, moving up. Okay, we've worked on Stevens County, we need to move out. Well, the next question is obviously, you know, do we go out from a point of view of, you know, is Minnesota the world, and do we stop there, or do we go even wider? And you can see our Minnesota Board of Animal Health farms splattered onto the map there. So the approach that I guess I took, and one of the things I've been spending maybe too much time on, is hang on, I got a better way of doing it, I hope. Yeah, is web-based GIS. So I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes showing you a tool that we've developed that basically has the GIS capability running on the server in our diagnostic laboratory, and the capability for users out in the field to interface with that, to visualize maps, to actually input data. So essentially we have a web-based database that's interfacing with a GIS. And when we started doing this, you know, Google Earth, those sorts of tools didn't exist. So about 18 months into it, all of a sudden we had new developments. So we've had to change things to try and move it forward. I'll just try and log in here, and this is going live in the public forum. So I'm going to actually log in as a Stevens County project. Oh, I'm not in. Okay. You can see my tremor going in your spares. Okay. And what that will do, hopefully, is take us into the system. And I'll just show you a couple of things because we could spend a lot of time on it. First, the GIS side, where we have a map viewer. And that map viewer basically interacts with the Google Earth viewer. So essentially we can say there's Minnesota, there's a map there, just to show what we can do, is we can actually go right out here. We can go right out, and you can see, I can tell you about the farm in Africa later, but we've essentially got the capability globally to interface, because it is done with Google Earth. From a point of view of, if we go up here, we can also interface with the satellite imagery. So everything you've seen, all those Google Earth maps before, that's what we've got. So we can zoom in and see the level of detail that Enrique and others have shown you on Google Earth anywhere on the planet through this interface, and also plot maps anywhere on the planet through the database. So there's a capability there, if anyone wanted to do it, that we can actually interface and record information about farms. And also a third option, which is a hybrid version, which lets you see, okay, we can look at roads, we can look at borders. And I'll just zoom in. I don't think I'll spend a lot more time on this here, because you've all seen the types of maps we can do. But just to zoom right in, and we can go in and see that same level of detail. You can also click on farms and look at information with farms. I'm working actually with Paul Yetzke and some producers at the moment to decide what information are people willing to share when they click on a farm. So you can say, you know, this is where I am, and Paul Yetzke is my veterinarian, or do we want to say I've got a screaming PRRS outbreak? So there's a lot of options there. I'll just briefly go to the database side, and then what we can do. So what I have, I'm logged in as Stevens County project. So what we've got in here is a database here that's got and the status are on the left are currently fictitious. I've just sort of shown them up there. We're not running it at the moment, though we can now. So basically we can list the farms in the project. We can view farms in the project. Immediately it'll go through and show there's the farm, and we can interact directly to the interactive map there and go back to the world. Or we can edit farm details and say, okay, this is it was a farried finished farm, but now it's a farrowing farm. Now it's got 500 sows. So we can record all the information, and we can change the location, the latitude, longitude, and we can also add disease records. So if there's a disease event there, and we can do it for any disease we specify, just agree on. So essentially the technology is put together now that we can map whatever we want to map, almost wherever we want to map it, through this type of interface. And I think you know, this is not the only way of doing it. It was just something we've been exploring. So I think going forward, projects like this, we'd be certainly interested in speaking with people about providing the support so that people don't go about trying to reinvent the wheel on this. So I'll go back to Enrique at this stage, because I'll be back later to talk on something else. So I haven't take too much time. It's really just to show you there's lots of toys, and we're limited by our imagination, I guess.
Okay. I'm going to show you some other tools that we have using for this project of regional control. Just briefly, we just look what Bob said about the programs that we have been working here in Minnesota. There are some other projects in planning for Goodhue and Ferryboat. And as Bob told us, also around Stevens County, there are some 6 counties in planning. In the case of Mexico, we are working in three areas. One is Tehuacan in central Mexico. There's also projects for doing something in Yucatan. And right now, we are working a lot in the area of Sonora. This is an state with 170,000 sows and about 1.5 million of pigs, growing pigs. We have divided the area in 4 different associations. Each of these sub-regions has a local coordinator for the program. This is just an image of how some of those farms are distributed in the area. Here we are applying another tool from this AdView program. In this case, we are applying the buffering to organize the producer in small groups of work. We are trying to have no more than 10 people at the time for meetings. So in this way, it's really easy to share information, and people feel more comfortable talking about their problems. And we have seen a lot of success in how they are really speak out everything what is happening in their sites. The basic of this buffering is the connectedness. In this case, it is said that points are connected if the distance between them is less than or equal to a given distance. The basic criteria for this distance was based on the work of Scott's team about insects moving pairs between points. As you saw before, it was 1.7 kilometers. So we decided to work with 2 kilometers. This is a buffer of 1 kilometer radius, so the possible maximum distance will be 2 kilometers. So this was the basic criteria for grouping these farms and work all of them together in a cluster. This is an actual cluster that we have working with. In fact, in the state, we have about 30 or 40 clusters. We just started this program about 5 months ago, so we went through the process of site location and then getting information about PRRS status and so on. And now we are having meetings with these peoples, again, applying imaging for have a better perspective of not only the location of the point, but also some geographical features. So organizing the subregions in this kind of clustering has been really useful for sharing information, for communication. That is one of the main points on this kind of regional control projects, communication among people. And we are also in the process of applying some other tools. In this case, this is just an example of what we can do once we start applying the PADRAP in January, February. We are going to start doing that. And we could visualize the risk value for each of the sites. And we will try to see if there's any pattern of geographical distribution of the high-risk sites in the area. But we are just still in the process of putting that to work. Peter.
Thanks, Enrique. For the second part, I'm just going to talk a little bit about animal movement and a technique called social network analysis, which is very well developed in sociology to look at relationships among different types of entities. And most of what I'm showing you now is work that Spencer Wayne was doing while he's continuing slow-moving PhD completion. So I'm too polite to actually name who stood up for this photograph, but I think another part that was of the discussion that I thought was important when I arrived in the US is, well, what are we doing with pig movement? You know, we've known since the plague in the Middle Ages that controlling movement is really important to controlling spread of infectious disease geographically. We have an industry on wheels. Can we hope to control PRRS effectively with laissez-faire movement? And, you know, I had too much time.
I should have put a PRRS virus picture on a couple of those. This is what I'll call my splat map of movements coming into Minnesota, and this is from the USda data showing hog inflows into Minnesota of 2001. It's old data, it doesn't matter that much. The wide range of sources they come to, the volume. Over a year in 2001, 3.5 million, 10,000 pigs per day flying in. So we're having fun talking about regional control of PRRS while we're importing 10,000 pigs a day from other sources. So, you know, how seriously do we have to take that? What can we do about it? So what Spencer did, some of the things he did was actually try and get data on animal movements at the national level through interstate movements.
getting some students to go through paper records in the Board of Animal Health to get zip code records of where pigs came into because that's recorded in the papers, and with the Rice and Stevens County going out and actually collecting data from producers in the regional counties to say what are the pig movement patterns that are going on, and how do we understand it, and how does it influence our thinking about the feasibility and the approaches that we might have to take at regional levels. There's tools for mapping and visualizing the flow of animals, and then I'll just briefly talk about the social network analysis because it's something where we think conceptually is really relevant, and it's just a matter of trying to figure out how can we effectively use it. Firstly, that's just a graph of the animal movement in 2006 nationally, so you can see we've got PRRS soup there pretty much over a large geographic area. So even though it's nice to say we're going to work on this little piece here, you've got to realise we're effectively a very well mixed industry, and so the probability of behaving like an island in the middle of that is pretty small. Just briefly, what Spencer did, as I mentioned, he essentially constructed a database, imported it into a couple of software versions. One's a FlowMapper, which interfaces with the Esri AdView products that Enrique spoke about, so you can map your relationships that you get in the network structure, and there's specific software, quite a few available, that if you've got the data in the right matrix format between, you know, the relationship, who does Bob Morrison drink beer with, we can sort of plot that map with these types of tool, and what are the implications for their health. So in just graphically illustrating movement, this is Rice and Stevens County again, and the data, and this is animals moving in and out, and you can probably see a couple of packing plants are on there. Obviously, very important destinations. Maybe if we say just let's look at inflows. So in collecting this data, we can get an idea of where from and the volume of movement of animals into a specific regional area. If we've got perfect biosecurity and safe ventilation that Scott's working on with us, all this stuff becomes moot. But I think we need to keep all these balls in the air at the moment from a point of view of profiling risk and understanding what we're doing. I'll just speak very briefly about the social network analysis. So we can record the data on movements, we can visualize it, and we can get a gut feel about it. What social network analysis is a specific research discipline that focuses on relationships between entities. What are the patterns of the relationships? What are the implications of the relationships? And it's a very well-developed sociology field that spill over into medicine, particularly in the areas of sexually transmitted diseases, needle-sharing transmission, diseases where person-to-person relationships contact are important to profiling risk. Entities in their situation are usually individual people. In ours, the farm becomes the person. So we're interested in the intra-farm relationships and what are the implications for that. So what are the nature and the probability of contacts between farms, and what does that involve with respect to disease transmission risk? Social network theory, the nature of the relationships is what you're really focusing, not necessarily the attributes of the farms. Different types of relationships identify different networks. So if we look at a population of farms, there'll be some networks that are based on semen source, other networks based on pig source, feed delivery, cull pickups, veterinarians, not that there's any risk associated with them, but you could look at relationships among farms based on the network of the veterinary services. And these structures of the relationships and the locations have importances for the individuals and for the overall system. So the position of a farm in the network influences both its own risk and the risk that it offers to others. And I think for veterinarians it's a very intuitive sort of thing. The methodology, it's unlike traditional statistics, because normally in statistics we say all our observations are independent. In network analysis, all the observations are a function of two entities, so you always have to have two individuals involved. They've got really well-developed methodology, metrics, software, and you can do multiple levels of analysis at individual through small groups to the whole network. So what I'm, I guess, raising here is that there's a whole tool out there that's fairly well developed that may have utility in looking at our relationships. What they measure are things called centrality. So there's about 20 well-defined definitions of centrality that you measure for an individual in a network. One of them is called degree centrality, and that could be Bob Morrison in the middle, and the number of people who drink beer with Bob Morrison would be his degree centrality. It's actually a much bigger group than that. The reach would go out one step further. So where do you have direct relationships with, and who do your partners have relationships with? And again, obviously, you can see in a farm flow structure that becomes particularly important from a point of view of where disease may be transmitted through shift of animals or through other routes. And there's 18. So I'm just using them as so they're very well defined. The method for calculating them is well established, and we're just saying, can we use some of these things and relate them to disease risk? Well, one of the things that I hope Spencer did. See, that worked. How are we going, Bob? We're nearly out of time. Okay. One was saying, well, in these county projects, let's look at their centrality measures and say, is there any difference between the counties in terms of their average centrality X, Y, or Z? And he looked at the ones that he thought were most sensible from a disease transmission risk and said, yeah, no, Stevens County and Rice County, on average, come out pretty similar. The second one was, did the odds of being PRRS positive increase with measures of centrality? And you've got to remember, this is a small database, it's an initial study. The overall model wasn't significant, but when we looked at it, the inReach was fairly highly statistically significant, and he had an odds ratio of 1.6. It was measured on a range of 1 to 6.8. But at that figure, what the inReach is who do I get pigs from, and how many farms give pigs to the people I get pigs from. So from an intuitive basis, you'd say, yeah, this could be interesting, and certainly it's consistent and biologically plausible. And so again, we're looking at things that understanding these networks and trying to relate them to disease risk. This is the end pretty much. PRRS control, everyone said we need all hands on deck in bringing in diagnostic, vaccine, GIS, all these tools. As far as the spatial management GIS goes, I think it's a question of understanding how we're going to do it, not if. I think we can't seriously have regional control programs without mapping there, and we've been doing that for centuries. We need to look at the social barriers as much as the technological barriers. I'll see if can we ignore movement? I think we need to do more in understanding movement patterns and maybe looking at analysis, though that I think is more of a research issue at the moment. Don't know what's. I think Bob's shut me down. I'll just close with a couple of quotes. This is from a geographer in terms of applying GIS technology broadly in all fields. The problems are not technological, they're sociological. So on all applications of GIS, because of sensitivity over information, there's big issues to get over. And that's the barrier with the mapping tool. And a futurist said the future's already here, it's just unevenly distributed. So I think we've got to look at how we can move these tools into our industry. Thanks, Bob.